Last month, I did mention that I want to reveal another episode from this show, and it's from Season 4, which was the same season I talked about Danger Things that was part of Season 4. And this episode, Brawl in the Heart, really showcased that there is potential into making a good Henry Danger episode, even with the goofy and campy stuff. But it's mainly the fact that they dropped the ball when it came to making the male characters dumb while making the female characters smart. Which, in all honesty, sums up a lot that this show just has a mixed reception when it aired for the first time, especially since that this was around the time Dan Schneider was walking on the show just months before he left Nickelodeon. In this episode, we get the introduction of Bish, who wants to brawl Charlotte in the hall, which everyone, including the teachers, is on board. And with Charlotte having no experiences of fighting off the bully Butch, Henry and Wei gives her lessons on to fights, but as it turns out, she can't learn anything from a 3-minute montage, in the words of Wei. Then again, judging of how they did this for comedic effect, I was just gonna be on board with it. Considering it may be stupid, it's not a terribly done comedic joke. I have to admit that I understand the humor of this show, of what it's trying to do, after watching more and more of these episodes every time I rewatch them. I'm just saying that this show back then was just at around the time, well, people will remember iCarly and Victorious, and then when Sam and Cat came out, they just couldn't be able to take it. And when it came to this, it's basically building off a new fan base when it comes to people who aren't interested into iCarly or Victorious, mainly the fact that they never watched them before, and then when they get into this show for the first time, they find some enjoyment out of it. And they probably liked the 3-minute montage joke to the point that it does kind of work out when it comes to them having their own sense of humor. I'm just saying that there are different types of sense of humors that don't really work, but I have to admit that this isn't one of them. But getting back on topic, the plot of this episode is mostly cliche of the victim facing off a bully in a fight that people are really invested in, and I've seen this multiple times. This cliche isn't redundant, but considering that the first half of the episode really feels like that the characters were expecting a brawl, but then the second half of the episode, it takes a different turn. It made me see that Charlotte is a good character when she is written correctly, and the sad thing is that the ending of the episode ruins basically anything of what this episode would have accomplished. Admittedly, there are other episodes that did Charlotte's character better, but you have to admit that they're at least trying to give Charlotte intelligence when it comes to handling the situation after realizing that the training wasn't meant for defending herself due to it being a 3-minute montage. So she decides to take care of Butch herself, which doesn't change the fact that Henry and Ray are willing to help her out, which leads to the ending of the episode that we're gonna get to later. Once she arrives at her school while Butch is waiting for her, she heads to the janitor closet in order to talk things out with Butch, which Jasper did the same thing, only for Butch to tie him up. And just when she's about to beat up Charlotte tells her who hurt you, and she wouldn't have a reason to act the way she is, and she finds excuses to beat up other people. In the age of 12, she fell on her rollerblades, which caused her to have a chipped tooth, which leads to her friends, including her cousin, making fun of her. In all honesty, this type of this type of information may be way too personal, but it's literally the point of how people like Butch act the way they are when it comes to bullying, which is something people shouldn't take. But when it came to the birth date that they have, honestly, what else would you feel if you got humiliated on your birthday? Especially when your cousin makes fun of you. Then again, it's one thing that the episode itself is mostly false advertising, since there's no brawl going on in the hallway, since the fight is officially off between Butch and Charlotte. But at the same time, I'm willing to forgive that due to the scene alone. Granted, it's not one of the best scenes in the Dan Schneider universe, since that there are other moments that are far more better than this, but did you really expect this type of scene to happen in iCarly or Victorious? Granted, the characters from Victorious do go inside the janitor closet from time to time, and the characters in this show did the same thing in their own janitor closet in school, but since Butch isn't over-the-top mean-spirited like the other characters from the Dan Schneider universe, it makes me convinced that she is mainly included to have Charlotte have some nuance when it comes to a relationship. Granted, it was never going to be the case after this episode if the ending never happened, but then again, considering that they at least try to do a twist when it comes to talking it out, it's just a shame that talking it out is never the solution to everything, due to nowadays people just want to cause drama on the internet. Despite all this taking place in the real world, it's not going to change the fact that internet drama is just going to have people getting piled on without anything stopping the people piling on them, which will probably put them in more stress than turning into a bully like Butch. I once was on the bandwagon of going against bullying, and when it comes to Butch, despite being the bully, she has intentions, considering that the bullying that she does in this episode isn't as emotionally physical. Like what she did to Charlotte by throwing her in a trash can is physical, but at the same time not emotionally physical. I'm just saying, whenever I think about these types of bullies, they don't do anything emotionally physical, since in the real world, bullies do emotional, physical damages to your mind. But since these types of shows, live action / cartoons, don't go too physical in order to prevent backlash, I wasn't really expecting a lot when it comes to emotional physicality in this episode, because Henry Danger doesn't really do physical, emotionally scenes in comparison to iCarly and Victorious, and of course Drake and Josh. Granted, there are bits and pieces that do happen with those types of elements in this show, but at the same time, you pretty much knew that Henry Danger is never going to be really emotional in comparison to iCarly and Victorious when it comes to the characters' interactions. There are some in occasions, but when it comes to episodes like this, it kind of sums up that the episodes from iCarly that were taking itself seriously, you can feel the characters, and while in this you may feel the characters, but at the same time with a different direction, it just kind of feels something you're supposed to get along with it, even though that you want to feel so much emotion and sympathy towards the characters. And since the ending of this episode ruins basically everything else, there's a reason why these types of endings don't always work out when it comes to the lore of Henry Danger, because Wayne Henry called the cops that there was a bank robbery, and inside of Butch's locker, all the money was inside, so they framed Butch to think that she stole money in order to prevent Charlotte getting a fight with Butch, which is one thing to help out Charlotte, but at the same time, Charlotte stated that she doesn't want their or anyone else's help, and she wants to handle the situation by herself. And since she did, this ending is a lot more worse than the ending in Danger Things, considering that this was at least a little bit more heartwarming when it came to the direction of how Charlotte's character went. And when it came to Butch getting arrested, all the while the episode ends while Charlotte will come bail her out some way once she completes her test in one of the classes. Honestly, that just makes me see why people didn't take this show seriously when they're fans of iCarly and Victorious. Regardless if this show is supposed to be for a new generation, there are still people who are fans of iCarly and Victorious found this show enjoyable, myself included. Granted, it's a relief that Charlotte wasn't in this whole thing, but then again, this also sums up on the fact that Henry and Ray are just proving to be a lot more stupider, and it's not done for comedic effect. If anything, it kind of sums up that Dan Schneider working on these shows is severely getting fed up with doing these episodes, to the point that even if what he did is way more physical towards the people he was around with, he was getting through a lot more stress by doing the same thing repeatedly, and by the time this episode came out, it has been possibly almost 2 decades since he's been part of Nickelodeon. Honestly, if anyone was in this position despite being extremely creepy towards the people around him, you will probably feel insane and probably wouldn't take the newer shows seriously like you did with your past projects. This shouldn't be a big deal, but when these episodes do the same method repeatedly, it's not really a running gag anymore, and it just makes it a lot more irritating, considering that it just portrays Captain Man and Kid Danger more as superheroes that get off so easily without any consequences. Because every time I think about these types of endings, it just makes me feel like that these two characters are a lot more glorified to be arrested, even though that they ended up getting arrested in the first Christmas episode, despite with stupid rules and laws. I wasn't expecting much from this episode upon watching it for the first time, but thinking about it more made me convinced that making a review out of it is the better solution, judging of how this episode really gave me the idea that this show is good, but there were stupid decisions that really makes it difficult to take the episode or this show seriously, even if it's supposed to be campy. This episode sums up onto why this show is difficult to enjoy when it comes to the decisions it makes. Even if this episode isn't meant to be the best episode ever when it comes to the behind the scenes of making these episodes, but if you consider on giving this show a chance, especially after watching iCarly and Victorious, then I recommend watching this episode, and honestly think that this episode would have been a lot more better with a different direction. Granted, there are other episodes that do deserve attention when it comes to a better direction, but I really wanted to review this episode because there could have been something else that would have made it would have made it a lot more better than having the entire thing ruined due to the ending. As for me talking about more about this show when it comes to other episodes, it's debatable, so potentially I might talk about a Piper episode when I get the chance. It could happen sooner or later, but then again, it's just how I feel, since that there was at least a couple of episodes that I do want to discuss Piper's character, since I've only talked about her briefly in one of my reviews of the episodes from this show. I'm giving this episode a 4.5 out of 10.